Can you hear us okay?
I'm like, whoa, who's calling me?
Yeah, I can. It's a little not so loud, but
I'll try to turn up the volume a little bit more and let me know.
yeah, if you could turn it up a little bit, that'd be great.
Good paint job. Yeah. I was looking at it, I was at the stoplight. That's a line bike. That's gotta be.
David, when did you record the No on 3 commercial?
When?
Yeah, because you didn't have the.
It was right when I. Yeah,
Showing up.
you're right.
You didn't have the.
Because I think this was right before Labor Day.
Well, you know what? You know what I want him to do? Just ask this simple question when people start saying yes on 3. Name one state that has converted, that has cheaper rates. There aren't any. There aren't any. And that really, and it really is.
Exactly right.
Right. This is just a basic conversation. Just name one city. Or name not one city, one state that is divested.
Hi, Bob.
Hi, Charlene. We're busy. Well, my wife's mother lives in Pennsylvania. Her rates are about 40% higher than ours are. Because it's privatized.
My gyroscope is off.
Question 3 is fantastic. You got a whole.
Okay, it's 2 o'clock. Are we ready to start? Do we have a
Yeah, Jenny's on the phone.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. It is 2 p.m. and the scheduled time to start the Regional Planning Governing Board for Thursday, October 11th. And with that, we will start with the roll call.
Jenny Breckus,
Here.
Naomi Dewar, absent. Paul McKenzie,
Here.
Marsha Burke-Bigler,
Here.
Charlene Bybee,
Here.
David Bobzien,
Here.
Donald Abbott,
Here.
Ed Lawson, absent. Von Hartung,
Present.
Jean Herman,
Here.
and non-voting member Veronica Frankel.
Thank you very much. And with that, we will go to the salute to the flag. And Mr. Abbott, Councilman Abbott, would you please lead us?
Yes. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay. And then we will go to approval of the agenda.
Second.
Any changes?
No, Madam Chair.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. And please, for the record, note that Ms. Doer has joined us. What is with my pencil? My pen is misbehaving. It keeps doing things it shouldn't. It worked that time. It worked that time. Okay, and how about approval of the minutes from the meeting of August 9th? Any changes?
I'm moving.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second? We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay. And our next agenda item is public comment.
We have 2 this evening, or this afternoon. We have Tammy Holt still and then Danny Cleus after. That's right.
Welcome, Ms. Holstill.
Good afternoon, Kim Holstill. Is it on?
Sounds like it.
Kim Holstill, and you always want to present me for the record, the water's still there, I'm still here, we are still here. This was something that was put out there last night, or a couple days ago. One of the ladies contacted Prato Ranch, and she finally got a response. And one of the things that they were talking about is all that they're going to be doing to assist and be such good neighbors in our neighborhood when they're building in a floodplain. So one of the things they talk about is Lear Boulevard and the elevation of Lemon Drive. If this shows you right here, Swan Lake, this is Lemon Drive. Over here is where Lear Boulevard would be, and it is in the floodplain. What's gonna happen when all of this development goes in and all of this floodplain is taken up, where is City of Reno stormwater going to go, besides all the other stormwater? When is it gonna be time to stop and look at everything? Here's a good example. I showed this Wednesday? Yeah, yesterday, City of Reno. There is 2014. Look how dry that lake is. That's Swan Lake. But you can see how open that area is, and it can absorb all the water that comes. Here's what it looks like now. This is Stead. It's upside down, so. This is Stead with all of the development now. There's no place for water to go. This goes to the idea that, and this one I'm not gonna be giving out because it's our only copy, but
Can't use it then.
this right here, North Valley's master plan from 1981.
Excuse me, just one moment. Would you please hold the clock for Ms. Holt? So can she put that up since she can't give it to us? Ms. Brunty?
Madam Chair, thank you, Jessica Prunty, for the record. No, you cannot unless it's going to be
Okay,
distributed.
would you pull it out, please?
Well,
And
for
just
the
talk for a
record,
minute.
I can talk about it.
Yes, you can.
For the record, we have the master plan from 1981. We'll be more than happy for anybody to see it, but there's some very interesting information in here regarding the aquifers, regarding floodplains, and I think the City of Reno and Washoe County should be looking at this because it is very important, and it should be followed if you are doing a master plan. That goes to the last thing, next to last thing, is this right here, which you guys got last night, and now the Board of Commissioners can see. This was from Saturday. When we raised money for the judicial review for Prato Ranch, the Clomar or Lomar that Prato Ranch is going to be doing, there are almost 200 right here, residents that have signed saying no.
Thank you very much, and for the record, if you want to bring that document into the RPGB office, they can scan it in and send it out to everybody.
All right, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Cleus?
Danny Cleus for the record. Since you guys are regional, every valley, every area has one of these. You all should be looking at these when you guys make your decisions. Because I know last night at the planning regional, it's not done because everybody just rubber stamped everything. In these, it has what our valleys really need. You don't need to be building in a floodplain. This one here says, don't do it. We discourage it. But yet, stamp, let's go to the floodplain. It's crazy how everything gets passed. But yet, you read these, 90% of the stuff that gets passed through our government should not be passed. What does regional do? You're supposed to be overlooking all this stuff. We got the city of Sparks, we got city of Reno, we got Washoe County. City of Reno and Washoe County that I know of are the worst at this. They don't look at this. This is my valley. I live there. Stuff is getting passed in that valley that should never be passed. From the city of Reno, from Washoe County. Now some of this stuff, it comes before regional. Regional should be looking at all this stuff and saying, no, you're not doing the right job for the citizens that pay your guys' salaries. It's crazy what you guys are doing. Just like Tammy said, Prato Ranch. What's build Lear Boulevard right through Swan Lake? What does that do? It takes the acreage of Swan Lake and takes it down. Prato Ranch, it'll be coming here because it's the biggest section of Prato Ranch South. Where's all that water gonna go then? We don't have any room for it now. I don't get it. Regional's supposed to overlook everything. Regional, that's why it says regional on it. And nobody wants to do their damn job. Nobody. I don't get it.
Thank you. Do we have any more public comment?
I have none at this time.
Thank you. We will close public comment and bring it back to the board. And with that, we will go to the consent agenda. It looks like there's one item on the consent agenda for possible action, and it's the Washoe County consensus forecast. Are there any questions from any members of the board? I'm looking for a motion to approve. Do we have any public comment on this?
I have none.
Okay. We have a motion to approve and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Business of the day. We will turn it over to our illustrious executive director and president, I think.
Executive Director. Thank you, Madam Chair. We have a resolution for David Bobsine and his term as chair, and I'd like to go ahead and read that now.
Okay.
So, whereas David Bobsine served as the chair of the Truckee Meadows Regional Planning Governing Board from August 2017 through August 2018, providing thoughtful, focused, and visionary leadership to the Regional Planning Governing Board, the Regional Planning Commission, and the Truckee Meadows Regional Planning Agency. And whereas David Bobsine, during his tenure as chair of the Regional Planning Governing Board, partnered on bringing the first joint meeting of the RPGB and the Regional Planning Commission for the 2019 Truckee Meadows Regional Plan Update, where the vision and goals of the plan update were discussed. And whereas David Bobsine, during his tenure, also oversaw the creation and approval of the request for qualifications and selection of a consultant to support the update. And whereas David Bobsine engaged in detailed discussions of each component of the update process with staff and encouraged broad community input, including the use of MetroQuest as one of the community engagement tools. And whereas David Bobsine, during his tenure as chair, sought to engage the board members collaboratively on important regional issues. And whereas David Bobsine supported the efforts to assess regional stormwater needs through a geographic information systems approach that included gathering information on the current stormwater systems and sharing that data with the local jurisdictions and the community. And whereas David Bobsine strove to provide structure and an inclusive environment for all voices to be heard during meetings. And whereas David Bobsine supported and guided the involvement of the RPGB and TMRPA in the Truckee Meadows Regional Strategy for Housing Affordability in partnership with Truckee Meadows Healthy Communities and Enterprise Community Partners. And whereas David Bobsine always brought his love of the environment to the meetings and shared his many intriguing and humorous tales of his outdoor life experiences. And whereas David Bobsine thoughtfully deliberated and led discussion on many important issues to the region, including funding affordable housing projects through the approval of the recommendations of the Washoe County Home Consortium and engaging as a partner in the Source Water Protection Program led by the state of Nevada. And whereas David Bobsine always brought his thoughtful and engaging style to the meetings, and whereas David Bobsine consistently and effectively exercised his responsibilities as a member of the Regional Planning Governing Board calmly, fairly, and efficiently with strong leadership, clear direction, respect for staff, and a commitment to the benefits of regional planning. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Regional Planning Governing Board does hereby extend its sincere appreciation to David Bobsine for serving as a member of the Regional Planning Governing Board and for his countless hours of public service on behalf of the citizens of the Truckee Meadows.
What can I say? And you expect me to follow you, huh?
Yeah.
Not a chance. Thank you for everything you've done. Thank you for being such a great chairman, and thanks for continuing to guide us, and I hope I can count on you to continue to help me with this whole process. Thank you. Thank you very much. Anyone else have a comment? We could roast him now if everybody wants to.
The roasting of David Bob's.
Charlene. Ms. Bybee.
I would just like to echo your thoughts, and with David having served as my vice chair for this commission through some interesting challenges and times when I was chair. I appreciate his calmness, his calm demeanor, his knowledge that he brings to the table, especially legislatively, and just his government experience, as well as being a member of this community to help us in decisions for regional planning and as we move forward. So I think he's been a great asset, and have always enjoyed working with him, and thank you for your service. And I think you'll do fine, Marcia and Donald. So I think each one of us brings something different to the table, and I think that's the beauty of a commission like this, so that each one of us have different strengths and weaknesses, and we can all learn from each other, support each other, and I'd like to thank you, David.
Thank you very much, and I am looking for a motion to accept and approve this resolution. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Nay? No. Thank you very much, David, again, for everything. We really appreciate everything you've done for us. Madam Executive Director, we are opening a public hearing, I believe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Item 7B for possible action, public hearing, Regional Plan Amendment, RPA 18-002, and we have Planner Chris Tully to take us through this item.
Thank you, Chris.
Good afternoon, Chair, members of the board. Chris Tully, TMRPA for the record. The case before you is a regional plan amendment to amend maps 9 to 11 of the 2012 Truckee Meadows Regional Plan, relocating a regional utility corridor on the Wild Creek Golf Course located at 3500 Sullivan Lane in the city of Sparks. Case number RPA 18-002. And the city of Sparks sponsored this requested regional plan amendment. For policy 3.8.1 of the regional plan, the removal of existing corridors and the creation of new corridors requires a regional plan amendment in order to relocate the existing 120 kilovolt overhead transmission line. The proposed mapping amendment would relocate the regional utility corridor approximately 940 feet north of the current location. The project site is depicted on this aerial. The proposed utility corridor is shown in blue, and the utility corridor to be removed is shown in orange. As indicated on this slide, the site is located in the City of Sparks' portion of the Truckee Meadows Service Area, or TMSA. According to materials submitted by the City of Sparks, the existing power line and utility corridor across a portion of the property that is flat and appropriate for development, and moving the corridor would leave the property better suited for redevelopment than is currently the case. Policy 4.3.6 of the Regional Plan identifies 6 factors that the Regional Planning Commission and Regional Planning Governing Board must consider, which are listed on this slide. In terms of the review criteria, staff did not identify any significant impacts of the proposal. On September 12, 2018, the Regional Planning Commission approved RPC Resolution 18-04, recommending approval of the proposed amendment to maps 9 to 11 of the 2012 Truckee Meadows Regional Plan. Regional Planning staff recommends the board consider the regional plan amendment as described in the staff report and adopt RPGB Resolution 18-04, which can be found on page 95 and 96 of the packet or attachment 3 of this item, and adopting the proposed amendment. You can find the suggested motion on the screen or on page 83 of your packet. This does conclude staff's presentation. TMRPA, City of Sparks staff, and the school district staff are available for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions, members of the, Mr. McKenzie?
So part of the findings we've got to make is based on the availability and timing and timing and phasing to infrastructure. And this utility relocation is not independent of something else. So how do we know that the infrastructure is going to be phased appropriately for this if we approve the utility relocation? The project that follows, how do we know that there's going to be availability of infrastructure of the infrastructure to support what's planned to be built here?
And that is, partly, staff is looking at this from, that the facilities exist out there, and that the newly constructed facilities would be similar in nature to what is there presently. So as far as timing, it would be utilizing essentially what's there. I don't know if you have anything to add.
Madam Chair, if I may.
Yes, please.
Kim Robinson for the record. This item is specifically regarding the movement of a utility corridor, and
But the utility corridor is not being moved independent of everything else in the world. And the other things in the world are very important. And I can guarantee you, this is the only bite at this apple you're gonna get. And those other issues are not gonna be addressed appropriately if we don't make sure that that plan is in front of us before we approve this. Because we don't have an opportunity to assure the concurrency is met on this project. And this is a master plan amendment. This is a change to our master plan, which requires that we have concurrency. And we can't guarantee that that's there until we see that there's a plan for the phasing of appropriate infrastructure to support the ultimate project that's going to be built there. And I don't believe this is timely in front of us unless the project in its entirety is in front of us, so we can see that it's truly going to meet all of the requirements for us to make a change to this utility corridor in our master plan.
Ms. Robinson, did you have something you wanted to add?
I did want to identify that this is a regional plan amendment. This is not a master plan amendment per se in terms of bringing in a master plan amendment from one of the jurisdictions. This was sponsored by the city of Sparks. It has been, we have the ability to look at this item as a utility corridor relocation based on what is in our current plan right now.
Commissioner Hartung.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with Mr. McKenzie. I won't be supporting this today because this is part of a larger plan. This is premature, in my opinion. We've not looked at the corridor that's going up Sullivan. That's not been addressed. We've not seen anything in terms of traffic. I recognize what we're doing today, but this is sort of like a frog in a pot. We're just heating up the water. And so I cannot support this. I've not seen anything that indicates that there is wider planning going on that's in front of us. And that's what I'm very concerned with. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Hartung. Councilwoman Bybee.
I guess the question that I would have is, we've done quite a few, since I've been on this board, we've done a number of utility corridor relocations. Have we ever, or are we required, maybe this is more for the attorney, are we required to have other information and other, what the two commission members are asking for? Is that a criteria for us to approve simply a regional corridor movement? Is that, I'm looking for prior, or what our requirements are.
Ms. Prenti.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jessica Prenti for the record. Excuse me. Councilwoman Bybee, if I understand the question, your question is whether or not they can look beyond the amendment in front of you today to determine whether or not to amend the regional plan. Is that the gist of it? What are the factors that you can look at?
Are we required by our procedurally, when we do a utility corridor, and I've done a number since I've been here, 4 years, I don't recall in any corridor utility corridor relocation that we have had other information we need, other requirements for infrastructure, anything else that was contingent other than the simple movement of the corridor. And I could be wrong. Is it a requirement for us, and is it something that we need to have? I'm understanding two commission members are asking for that, but what are our requirements per statute?
There is no distinction in the statutes between different types of regional plan amendments. And so you have the factors set forth on the prior slide that Mr. Tolley presented to you. And there is some, they are broad factors. And so you can look at that entirely, but you do have to look at the amendment on its face as well as what it's actually proposing to do. And I think I would counsel caution in going beyond the face of the amendment to a project that's yet to be presented.
Councilwoman Dewar?
Yeah, I will admit that this is, my focus is generally much more south of here than this project. And what I'm wondering is there a timing associated with this? Because I'm very concerned that two members of our body are expressing concerns, and I really don't think I know enough about what they're concerned about, nor what this is based on. I mean, I've looked at the maps and so on, but I feel like there are factors here that I'm not aware of. And so I just wondered if you could explain a little bit about the timing, what is dependent upon our decision here today.
Yeah.
Hi, Jim Rundle, City of Sparks. I'm the planning manager. And what I wanted to put out there is Sparks did not include a project with this because you can't make the findings on the project, because one of our first findings would be, is this project in conformance with the master plan and regional plan, which we'd have to say no. So Sparks submitted this application for a regional plan amendment to move the utility corridor so that it could consider a request from ultimately probably the school district to move that power line. But at this point, it would be premature to consider, in my opinion, I differ a little bit from legal's perspective. I don't believe you can go out and consider traffic impacts. And those because you're considering a movement of a utility corridor and you begin to consider a project that you believe that understandably that the project is associated with. But at this point, we could not make the findings on moving the utility corridor because the regional plan amendment wasn't in place.
Okay, so let me just make sure I understand. In order to submit a project and find it in conformance, right now you would not be able to find it in conformance because the utility corridor is not in the right place.
Correct.
So this would be a precursor to submittal of a project with an expectation or hope that it would be found in conformance. So that's number one, is that correct?
Yeah, in the Sparks Municipal Code, to construct a utility such as a transmission line, you'd be required to do a conditional use permit, which is a public hearing. And those findings, as you're getting at, we would have to make the finding, is it conform with the master plan and regional plan? We wouldn't have been able to make that finding.
Okay, and then number two, in order to prove this, I'm probably differing a little bit from both exactly what our attorney said and exactly what some other folks have said. To me, my experience has been that in order to approve in anything, like this is a resolution, we have to be able to make the findings. And I think what Mr. McKenzie potentially is getting at is that it could make the findings, at least if I'm understanding him correctly, that it doesn't meet some of the findings it would need to meet. Is that correct, Mr. McKenzie?
Mr. McKenzie?
From your perspective?
From my perspective, without seeing the project, you can't see if it's going to meet the findings.
Okay, so it's sort of
Because
a chicken
this utility corridor relocation is not independent of in itself.
Well, it's a
And
precursor.
every utility corridor relocation that I've reviewed in the past has had a project surrounding it.
Right.
That this is the reason we have to relocate the utility corridor, because this is what the project looks like and this is what the corridor needs to look like. And while you may not be approving the project, you have the project there to compare the utility corridor and to make sure you can make the findings. And I've only done one utility relocation prior to this one. But in that case, we had a project sitting there that was, so you could see what the project was going to look like with the utility relocate around it. And included in that was all of the findings you need to make for traffic, stormwater, water, sewer. The
Okay.
fact that it was going to be built on an area that you didn't have to have disturbed slopes in excess of 30%. And so this is nothing. There's no reason to approve a utility relocate because there's no project here. So there's no reason for even to make the findings. There's no grounds for the findings.
All right, so just to continue, so if I may, Madam Chair.
Certainly.
The one I'm familiar with is in my ward, there was a utility relocation to support the development of the Caramello Ranch project, for example. So we had a good example. We knew what the project was. We knew why the corridor had to be moved. And we basically, there was already if I recall, PUD, and what was coming in was a PUD amendment. And the amendment included a utility relocation as well. So I don't know how to deal with the chicken and egg situation that Mr. McKenzie is describing, in that your specific rules at the City of Sparks call for the utility corridor to be moved first. And in our world, we usually would look at that as a result of approving a project. Well, we've approved this project, but there also needs to be a companion utility corridor relocation. So I guess I'm asking our staff and our Madam Chair.
Could I try to address that question?
How we want to
Certainly.
move forward.
Let's see, are we council people or commissioners at this?
Today we're commissioners, I think.
Councilwoman Dewar, excuse me. I can appreciate Councilman McKenzie's point and your point. What would be required if this regional plan amendment were to be approved at the governing board level? What would be required in the city of Sparks is a conditional use permit, and it's the same as a special use permit. In Sparks, we call them conditional use permits, to construct the transmission line, as I was stating earlier. That would be a project of regional significance, if that's correct, Chair, or Ms. Robinson. It would be over 120 kilowatts, so the state law would consider it a project of regional significance, which would come back in front of the Regional Planning Commission as a conformance review for a project of regional significance. If the governing board wanted to consider the project, or if it is considered a project, the movement of the transmission line at that point, they could look at that by calling it up to the governing board. And then you would be looking at the actual conditional use permit for the transmission line.
So you're saying that at this Regional Planning Commission, we would take 2 looks at this? You're suggesting the process is that we would reestablish a transmission corridor, then later a specific project would come forward to move the transmission. We'd have to find it in conformance.
It will be a project of
two-step
regional,
process.
it'll be a project of regional significance.
Right. But you said something about calling it up.
Well, because projects of regional significance are similar to conditional use permits at the local level, where the city councils don't always review them, but the planning commissions do. It's a similar process, I believe, at the regional planning level, where the governing board has delegated that authority to the regional planning commission. But I believe Ms. Robinson can confirm that if the governing board wanted to look at that as well, they could call it up from the regional planning commission.
Madam Chair, if I may.
Yes, please.
Kim Robinson, for the record. I'm going to look to legal. I believe that the governing board can identify and provide staff with a recommendation that they would like to have a conversation and see this item, but I'm going to refer to Ms. Prunty.
Yes, Jessica Prunty for the record. The statutes don't generally look at it in those type of terms. They see a bifurcation when conformance review is generally at the Regional Planning Commission level. However, I think that the statutes are not strict in that sense, and that the governing board does have the authority to make that directive and request that to come up. Or this item could also be continued so they could come up together as well, so.
Well, and if I may, because that's exactly where I was going. Is a way around this is to continue it and have them come together where we could consider them together. That's where I was going.
Madam Chair.
Yes, sir.
May I respond to that?
Certainly.
Councilwoman Dewar, again, my concern is that we cannot make the findings on conformance with the regional plan and master plan, because the regional planning corridor would not have been moved. So we would have to recommend denial on a request to construct the line in a new corridor, because the corridor wouldn't be there.
Could you not, just for the record, could you not, instead of denying it, make the change at that time when you're So you make the change to the corridor, to moving the corridor at the same time that you make the approval of the rest of the project?
We would be assuming a outcome of the governing board if we recommended approval on the conditional use permit for the construction of the line.
I think Commissioner Hartung was next, I believe. Commissioner Hartung?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And again, these are like moves on a chessboard. They're not made just randomly. They're made for a reason, because there's an ultimate goal in mind. I know that our colleagues from the city of Sparks, sadly we only have two today, but the one member that does represent this, Mr. Lawson, I believe he was the lone dissenting voice on that vote. I, again, agree with Mr. McKenzie. I would like to see wider what's going on. I'd like to see what's going to happen going up Sullivan. There's a, I don't know, what is it, Mr. Rundle? Is it a 120 kV that's going up Sullivan?
I'm not sure. There is a transmission line that runs north and south on Sullivan. I don't know.
Exactly. It parallels Sullivan.
It does.
And that's, all of those things are going to have to be dealt with. It's a 120 kV.
It looks like that is the case.
Yeah, it doesn't look like a 62 kV to me. The stanchions are way too big. There's a lot of moving parts with this, and I'd like to see more. I want to understand how that's going to be dealt with. I want to understand how Sullivan's going to be dealt with. I want to understand how McCarran's going to be dealt with. I recognize what we're here to talk about, but these are all just very slow moves on the board, and then we make all of these moves, and then, as Mr. McKenzie has appropriately pointed out, I believe, then there's no opportunity to review some of this stuff, and we get no chance to take a bite at the apple. And then we have another Eagle Canyon on our hands, where we have major issues in terms of traffic movements, and McCarran it moves a lot of trips per day. So it's a real concern for me. This is the beginning, and I think I want to talk about it as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Hartung. Councilman McKenzie.
The question, so you move the corridor, the project to move the power line isn't approved. You haven't got a corridor for it to run anymore.
Yeah, I agree with your concern. I've actually discussed that with Ms. Robinson on potential policies we need to identify in the new regional plan. And this is exactly as you're speaking to.
I can't support it until I can see that we can address all of the issues that we have to make for findings surrounding this. And I don't think we can do that until we have a true picture of what the project looks like in its entirety, not just that I'm going to move the power line up the hill.
Thank you, Mr. McKenzie. Councilwoman Bybee.
I think Jim, correct me if I'm not clear on this, but I understand my fellow commissioners' concerns on the whole project, on all the implications of that, but that's not where we are today. And we can't go there unless we approve this to allow the corridor to be moved to come back to us. I mean, all of the actual project itself, the moving of that, because we're not in compliance right now, this is the first step. It's not the final step of what we're going to do. And I think as far as the corridor being moved, whether it's a school or other development, I think it makes sense to move that corridor back to the north end of that property for any future development and/or to protect that golf course. So by moving it back, development can happen and not, the people who have been so vocal at all of our chambers for the last year. It protects the golf course too, because it allows other development, whether that is the school or whether it's something else, to happen. But I think today, the decision we're making today allows things to move forward. And that's the first step I think we need to give you, because it's not the last bite of the apple, and it certainly is not going to be all of the other considerations of the project itself or something that will happen down the road, and it'll happen not just here, but planning, but at our local jurisdictions, at the school district. I mean, there's a lot of moving parts for sure. But I think this first step is a critical first step to at least give you the opportunity, and the city of Sparks, because we're the ones who have approved this and want to see it move forward so that we can take that next step. And I'm not saying that all of us are going to agree what that next step is, but we can't take any steps if we don't do this today.
Thank you, Ms. Bobby. Council Member Abbott.
Yeah, so if we were not to make a recommendation to pass today, we're kind of dead in the water, aren't we? Because you can't have a recommendation of approval, or it'd be a denial at that point, and we won't ever see I'm sure we'll see it again, but we're gonna be back at this first step.
Madam Chair, if I may.
Yes, certainly.
To echo, to answer Councilman Abbott and Councilwoman Bybee's questions, it is my opinion that we would, the consideration would be dead because we wouldn't be able to process a recommendation of denial for the transmission line, for the construction of the transmission line. And I do believe that this is the first step, and the governing board would have other opportunities to consider those findings as were being discussed. But the city of Sparks is following the protocol and not getting ahead of itself on a project. All the local jurisdictions do it at the local level, where you review a master plan amendment, and then if it goes, then the next process is consideration of a rezoning or a project, but you can't do them together all the time. And another thing I'd like to add, if you'll allow me, Commissioner Burke-Bigler, Chairman.
Certainly.
Chairperson Burke-Bigler, on the overhead,
Could we put the overhead up, please?
included in the staff report, it identifies, as Councilwoman Bybee was describing, it's a little difficult to see, but the existing corridor is in orange here, and then the proposal is in the blue, and staff, City of Sparks staff did propose to regional planning, and I believe they included it in their report, that should the school not go forward, this is still appropriate for redevelopment of the site with another project or preservation of the golf course, because it moves it off the area that is most appropriate for adaptive reuse or redevelopment, if you will. And I think that's the point you were trying to make, Councilwoman Bybee.
Thank you, Councilwoman Doer.
Oh, I defer to Mr. Bobzien, who hasn't spoken yet.
Councilman Bobzien.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Councilman Doer. Madam.
Force of habit, it's okay, I understand.
What happens when you RPGB after a council meeting? Sorry about that. I'm still catching up. You know, this is, I think, it's been a very interesting situation here that we have, and I find myself wanting to be very respectful to the idea that the jurisdiction that's bringing this forward recognizes full well that they have a lot more territory to cover before there's an actual project that comes back to us, and understanding that we may very well be seeing this. It is, okay, I'm just not talking into it. Knowing that this may very well be back before us as a project of regional significance, you know, I want to be deferential to the jurisdiction that's bringing this forward. I think many of us up here have been exposed to this issue on a variety of different regional boards and commissions on which we sit. This is not going to be the last of it, but I want to be deferential to Sparks here. To let them move forward with this, and then we'll see where it goes from there. Recognizing that there's been, even on your council, certainly there's been a lot of back and forth and vigorous debate about you know, the overall future of this property. So I'm gonna opt for getting out of the kitchen.
Thank you,
Madam
Mr.
Chair.
Bobzien.
Excuse me, Madam Chair, sorry.
Yes,
Jessica
Ms.
Prunty for the
Prunty.
record. Just for clarity, Mr. Rundle, could you, for the record, make clear the project that will be coming forward for conformance review if, in fact, this amendment is passed? It's the lines, correct?
Right. Well, I'm not going to dance around a project. I think we all know what's being considered here at the site, but there's been no projects.
No, I think the earlier reference to legal, I think the earlier reference was the line moving itself would require a special use permit that would likely trigger project of regional significance, and that may very well get elevated to our, okay.
I just wanted to make sure that that was clear for the public record. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Prunty. Councilwoman Doer.
Yeah, just a follow-up question. I'm a little unclear still on the process of how, and it's a question for our attorney. If we did want to see a project that would normally be reviewed by the Regional Governing Board, Regional Planning Commission, come to the Governing Board, what would that process be?
I think
When
we-
you say
we-
call it up, I mean, do we have to have a vote in front of us? Do we have to put it on our agenda? I mean, how do we do that?
I think you just need to have a vote and make that part of your motion today if you want, or as a part of a future agenda item if you like. Or the director can put it on the Regional Planning Commission's agenda when it does come forward for conformance review.
Well, I guess I'd like to ask my colleagues, if I understand the project, I'm supportive of the project. And I voted, in support of it in other forms. So I don't want to be obstructionist here, and I don't want to get involved in procedural maneuver. However, what I am concerned about is, Mr. McKenzie said something that's very important to me, which is I do want to make sure that Regional Planning Governing Board has an opportunity to look at the project in all of its flavors and issues and challenges. And if that is the only way we do it, is to append it to an emotion, then I just wanted to make sure I knew that, and I also wondered what my colleagues from Sparks felt about that.
I can hop on. I think it's a
Madam-
good idea to pull.
Mr. Abbott, please.
It's my first time talking. No, I think it's a great idea for us to pull it up, take a look. But we won't, after the next step after this, we're not going to look at a school. We don't need to dance like you said, Jim. So we all know there's a school going on here. We won't look at anything on that building, not the building permit, but the amendment, or will we?
Madam Chair, I'd like me
Certainly.
to address that. Through the chair, Councilwoman Dewar, to be transparent, the item that would come back, assuming an approval of a regional plan amendment today, would be a conformance review for the construction of a 120 kilovolt power line.
Right, I got it.
Transmission line, not for the.
I got
review- As Councilman Abbott pointed to, not for the review of a school.
Right.
The review of the school would be by discretionary hearing at the City of Sparks level. And it would not trigger, I don't believe it would trigger any of the.
The school
project-
itself.
Correct.
Right, so the school itself, review of that will go to the Sparks Council.
Sparks Planning Commission at this point, if the Sparks City Council chose to pull it up, as I was saying the governing board could do, then it would go to.
Got it. Well, it's just, we're just trying to lay out process here and make sure everybody knows what we're voting on. And in that, we're talking about moving a power line. Still, and all that has implications. A lot of people care about power lines. The amount of wattage involved, the impacts. A lot of people have strong feelings about that. That's one reason maybe they're not located generally on top of schools. And those there's a reason to be moving a power line. So I'm either willing to make a motion or support a motion, but I think we've kind of explored.
Okay, I
where we
think
are.
we do have a motion, but I'm curious, and this is probably a question for Ms. Prunty. If Sparks wanted to relocate this power line, and there was no project involved here, nothing, didn't they just decided that they would rather relocate their power line, it's within their footprint to do that? Would we still be fighting? Would we still be fighting over this?
It would still be a regional plan amendment, Madam Chair.
Okay.
So we would be here today. But to the concern about how we procedurally call up the conformance review of the line project, when that actually comes from, because of open meeting concerns, and it's not been agendized today, we cannot make that motion today.
That's what I
But
thought.
what would happen is that the Regional Planning Commission, when it does come forward for conformance review, we can handle it within that commission and that agendized properly to make sure that it flows up to the governing board after that meeting, if in fact that's what you want to do.
All right, and with that, we will go to Councilwoman Bybee. Did you have something? you needed to
I'm
add?
ready to make a motion.
Hold on just a minute.
Madam Chair, just clarity for the record, I think everybody's here. The power line will come back to regional planning. Any type of development that is currently potentially thought about is not coming back to regional planning.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
And when you say regional planning, you mean Regional Planning Commission, not Regional Planning Governing Board?
No, it's yes. I don't mean it's coming back to neither. The
No, I'm talking about the power
Oh, the power
line.
line, yes, it'll come back to the commission.
To the Regional Planning
Commission,
Commission, not the
Yes.
Governing Board.
correct.
Okay. Councilwoman Bybee.
I'm ready to make a motion. I move to adopt
One comment.
Regional Planning Governing Board.
Could you hold it just 1 minute, Mr. McKenzie?
Okay, I don't know if we do discussion after.
And to make it clear, there probably will not be any compliance with traffic, stormwater, or anything else with that final thing that comes back to planning that addresses the moving of that line. It'll just be the movement of the line, the construction project for the line. So the concurrency and compliance that we look for with projects that impact our community, that is not going to be there. That's one of the findings we're supposed to be making right now, and we're never going to get an opportunity to see if that's ever met if we approve this today.
With that, Councilwoman Bybee.
I move to adopt Regional Planning Governing Board Resolution 18-04, amending maps 9 through 11 of the 2012 Truckee Meadows Regional Plan as detailed in the staff report.
I'll second it.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. We will do a roll call vote, but first let's see if there's any public comment. I see no public comment, so we'll close public comment, and we will do a roll call vote,
I have
please.
one question.
Yes,
Just to be clear, I'm sorry to come back to you, Madam Attorney, but should we want to look in any detail at the power line itself? It's naturally going to the Planning Commission. In order to have it come up in front of the governing board, what would that take? I still really need to understand. I understand it's at the Planning Commission, but do we need to put it on a future agenda item? What?
It would be a future agenda item.
And we would just request a future agenda item?
And through your director, she can also agendize it at the Reno Planning Commission, their next meeting, or whenever it might come forward. We don't know the timing of when that conformance
Right.
review is going to come forward.
Okay.
So we will make a note of it for future agenda items, and the director will make note of it for the Reno Planning Commission item. But we cannot take action on that today because it has not been properly agendized as far as making a motion to have it called up to the RPGB.
thank you. And isn't it, Ms. Prunty, isn't it also true that any member of this commission could in fact ask for an item to be brought before the board at any time and have it agendized?
Yes, Madam Chair, you are the governing board
So-
of the
That's what I
agency.
thought, that we could just, any one of us could request an agenda item.
Yes.
Okay. So with that, we will take a roll call vote.
Jenny Breckus?
Could I ask a question before the roll call vote starts?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so with that, we will take a roll call vote.
Oh, that's.
Jenny Breckus. Hello, I've asked for a question. I don't think.
Yeah, Jenny, can you
Okay, I
hear
might
us?
be a little behind on my timing because I'm watching the live stream vote, but the question is to staff is, why is a high school not a project of regional significance in any of the thresholds? And if you combine the power line movement as part and parcel of the high school, why don't the two of them together trigger a project of regional significance, and do other high schools, when they were constructed, trigger projects of regional significance?
Madam Chair.
Yes. And Jenny is, Ms. Breckus is on a 10-second delay, so it'll take her a bit to catch up with you.
Councilwoman Breckus, Jim Rundle, City of Sparks. Project of regional significance is defined by Nevada revised statutes, and it's also included in the regional plan. If the project comes in and it does not exceed a certain amount of gallons per day in generation of sewer, or exceed number of trips per day.
Jenny, could you turn down your replay of the meeting that you're hearing, because it's interfering with us hearing what you're saying? I mean, it's the actual, I understand, but what I mean is...
Jenny, did you hear that?
And does not exceed a certain amount of gallons per day.
It's little Jim.
Or exceed number of trips per day.
Okay,
All right.
we're ready to hear the answer to your question.
Chris with regional planning just handed me the outline, so I didn't have to remember them. But the statute identifies that it's employment of 938 employees, housing, which wouldn't apply in the case of a school, hotels, which wouldn't apply in the case of a school, sewer generation of 187,500 gallons per day, water usage of 625 acre feet, traffic of 6,250 daily trips, and student populations of less than 325 students.
Less than?
By not less than 325 students. It's on Appendix 4, page 3 of the regional plan. And that's for an increase of students by that much.
An increase of,
Now, a project, again, a school, I'm just going to say a school has not been submitted to the city of Sparks
Sure.
for review. I don't believe a school at that site would exceed the thresholds of any of those that I just identified. If they did, then it would be a project of regional significance, and again, Regional Planning Commission would be reviewing it for a conformance review to the regional plan after it went through the city of Sparks process, which would be at minimum oddly enough, a conditional use permit for development on a hillside. The property is zoned public facility in Sparks, and public facilities permit schools by administrative review. A couple of years ago, the city of Sparks, city of Reno, and Washoe County all identified a process for approving schools by a mandate from the state, and that was to approve them by administrative approval. The reason that this would be by public hearing, oddly enough, in my opinion, is that it's development on a hillside of certain slopes. And it triggers the city of Sparks' hillside development, which is what would require the conditional review, special use permit at the planning commission level. If it were on a flat area outside of the conditional use permit for a transmission line, there would be no public hearing for the school. And I think that addresses Councilwoman Breckis's question on the whether or not this a high school at this site would require a conditional use permit. I cannot say whether or not there's been a high school or any school, for that matter, in the Truckee Meadows that exceeded or tripped the exceeded the thresholds that I just outlined.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
To finish the questions that Councilmember Breckus asked, I would have to research to see if school previously triggered a project of regional significance thresholds. In terms of the question, can we put together a PR or a line movement with another project for PRS? We have very clear guidelines regarding project of regional significance, and we are staying within those guidelines. That there's nothing contemplated either in statute or in our plan that allows some type of joining of that.
Madam Chair, under discussion.
Yes, under discussion. Commissioner Hartung.
Thank you. And I believe that the reason that this is being called out is for the very reason that Mr. McKenzie is pointing out, because it would have to come for conformance review by the Regional Planning Commission and the Regional Governing Board if this were left in. So by culling this out, it allows circumvention. And again, I like Mr. McKenzie, I'm concerned with traffic. I've been very clear with that. I think traffic is going to be a nightmare. I think it's going to really push things over the edge. And this is a way that multiple agencies don't get a bite at that and get a chance to really voice that concern. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Okay, Ms. Breckus, are you back with us, and did you hear everything?
4 minutes for the signal to get to Mars.
I don't think she's that far away.
Well, there's a delay.
Yeah.
I'm guessing called Skyping or something. I think it's a pretty good delay.
I'm sending her a text right now.
Hello, I did hear everything that Mr. Rundle said, and are you still on the roll call vote?
Yes, we will start it again as soon as your question has been answered.
Okay, my question has been answered to the degree that the information was provided without there being what I felt was definitive answer, and maybe it can't be provided because the project hasn't been scoped by our planning staff or the jurisdiction staff or even the development proposer, which would be the school district, to understand if it is a project of regional significance. And so for that reason, I will be voting in the negative, but more so because I feel that I don't have enough information before me at this time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Please continue on with the roll call vote.
Naomi Dewar,
Yes.
Paul McKenzie, Marsha Burke-Bigler,
Yes.
Charlene Bybee,
Yes.
David Bobzien, Donald Abbott,
Yes.
Vaughn Hartung,
Nay.
Jean Herman,
I'm sorry, Jean, I didn't.
Nay.
Nay. I might count that as 5-4, so the motion passes.
Does not, it requires a 6.
It requires 6?
Yes, it requires a supermajority.
That's correct. It does require a two-thirds majority.
A 2/3 majority. Okay, so the motion fails.
Excuse me, Madam Chair, I'm sorry. That's a simple majority of the entire membership.
Oh, my apologies.
It said in the-
Simple
it said in the-
majority of
it
the
said in
entire
staff
membership.
report that it required a 6.
So we're missing one person?
Two? Oh, one.
We're missing one person.
A simple majority, excuse me, Madam Chair, a simple majority of the total membership is 6.
I'm sorry,
A simple majority of the total membership, which is 10, would be 6 votes.
that's correct. That's what I was just saying. We're missing one person, so we can't do that under this. And so,
It's not of the, is it of the presence?
no, of the membership,
Of the
she said.
members.
So it'd be 6. So the motion fails. All right, so the motion fails. So, Madam Executive Director, I would go to you and say, what do we do with this now?
Madam Chair, I will look to Jessica Prenti. My understanding is that this motion fails, and this board does not need to take any other action at this point in time, and you can move forward to your next item if you so choose.
Okay,
Madam Chair.
yes.
Can I ask the attorney if we can request it to come forward to our next Regional Planning Governing Board meeting? Can I request that the matter be brought forth again?
Oh,
Prevailing side, can bring it back,
so it would have to be a motion for reconsideration on the prevailing side.
but from the prevailing side.
So it'd have to be a person that voted no.
There is no prevailing.
Well, it's a technical denial, so I assume that someone who voted no, I don't know, would have to ask for a reconsideration at some point.
Madam Chair,
Mr. McKenzie?
if we could see the stuff that would bring this into compliance with traffic, flood, and everything else at the time that we looked at it, if that could be brought forward in a forum so that we could see that this was going to meet the requirements, addressing flood or stormwater, addressing the traffic, and the other things that are of concern. I mean, we've got an irrigation ditch across there that has to be relocated or something done with because it can't convey stormwater and they can't use it as a canoe racing route during at the school. But if we could see a plan for all of that stuff, I would be willing to entertain a reconsideration if that stuff was presented with this relocation so that we could see that this actually, we could make the findings as outlined in our requirements under the master plan, that we be able to make those certain findings. So if it was brought forward in that format, I would be happy to reconsider this. But if I would have been brought forward in that format today, I may have been a positive vote on the project. It's not that I don't believe this is a good project. It's not something that we need in the community. I 100% believe we need this in the community, but we need it done right. And this is the opportunity, the only opportunity that we have to assure that the issues that affect the community are addressed with this school, because we're living with a lack of planning surrounding a number of schools in our community because of something that was in good intention at the legislature, that schools didn't have to go through this type of review, so that we didn't have to look at traffic and we didn't have to look at all the other things that impacted the community. And while there was good intention behind that legislation at the legislature, it's had bad results. And those bad results can be seen throughout the community, and it's bad for the safety of the children. It's bad for traffic. It's bad for a lot of things. And if we can look at this project in its entirety to assure those issues are addressed, then I would be willing to make a motion to reconsider under those conditions.
Thank you, Mr. McKenzie. Ms. Prunty, I have a question for you.
Yes, Madam Chair.
Please correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe this says that this is a regional plan amendment, consideration and possible action to adopt RPGB Resolution 1804 regarding an amendment to maps 9 through 11, relocating an existing regional utility corridor on the Wild Creek Golf Course located at 3500 Sullivan Lane. I don't see anything in that talks about a project associated with it, simply a relocation of the line. So I don't see how we have a legal authority, and I'm not a lawyer, so I'm just saying I don't see how we have a legal authority to, based on the language that is in this particular agenda item, to condition it to be returned upon any reason.
I agree with you, Madam Chair. A motion to reconsider can be made in accordance with the RPGB bylaws. It must be made by someone on the prevailing side.
Understand.
And it must be made today or at the next regular scheduled meeting, but it cannot be made conditional. It's just simply a motion to reconsider.
Okay, thank you very much. Under those terms,
And a
oh, I'm
question.
sorry, Ms. Bybee.
I just had a question for Mr. McKenzie on the things that you're asking for to provide you with more information. You're talking about the data and information you need on the project itself. The project we're looking at and voting on here is simply the movement of the power line and the utility corridor, but are the things you're asking for are for the possible school and that kind of information, which is not, is that, I guess that's my question. You're asking for it regarding the school, not all of the things you asked for with regard to simply the power line relocation.
This change of utility corridor is not simply to change the utility corridor. It's for a project. And that project is going to have a significant impact on the surrounding community. And we cannot make the findings that those impacts have been mitigated.
Thank you, Mr. McKenzie. Ms. Frankel.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak. I know it's rare that I speak on any issues, but it is so directly related to, as you all know, that this is part of the long-term vision for our school district to build a school. But the movement of the utility corridor does not preclude that. In fact, the movement of the utility corridor was precisely, and I want to be all deferential to City Councilman McKenzie, it was actually in response to community input about where the school could be located. In fact, was moved further northwest and is what is actually precipitating the school district's request to move the utility corridor. If the corridor does not move, the school, if it is approved, and at which point the district has the land, which of course we still do not, but at that point, if we were to build a school, the not moving the corridor will have an impact on the district requiring a larger piece of property. And in fact, we've been trying to do as little as possible to preserve the open space in the golf course in response to the community input. So that is actually, the community input is what is driving the school district's request to actually move the anticipated site of the school, which then would require potentially moving the utility corridor in the interest of the design, the cost, and the size of the lot of the school. So I did want to put that out. I probably could have shared that before the vote. But I think that that's an important piece of information to really understand, because again, the district will continue to pursue and want to pursue the idea of a school in that area. We need one, the kids need one, the kids deserve one. And so the movement of the corridor or non-movement of the corridor is going to direct how that school is going to look if we end up having the opportunity to do that in a negative way and in terms of cost to the taxpayer. So movement of the corridor had a lot of positive benefits, not just for the school, but my understanding is it was positive, as Councilwoman Bybee suggested, for the lot itself, for whatever development occurs there. So I just wanted to share that insight and offer that as some additional information.
Thank you, Ms. Frankel. Ms. Dorr.
Yeah. So earlier in our conversation, a comment was made that the movement of the power line was bifurcated from the school project. Specifically, what was implied, that was specifically because if it was attached, that would in of itself have triggered the whole school project to come up to this board. At least that's what I derived out of the conversation. So I see two ways forward. One is to have the school board, I see shaking of head, no?
Please.
Yes, could you address that?
Councilwoman Dewar, to your point, for point of clarification through the chair, the school district submitted a request. Ultimately, because it's a regional plan amendment, it comes from the city of Sparks. But the city of Sparks was trying to follow the procedures that are set forth in the statutes. And again, that was the initial step to move the power line, as Trustee Frankel identified, was to permit for a better site or a pad for an ultimate project.
Sure.
But it wasn't necessarily to not bring the school to regional planning.
Okay. So that's, thank you for putting that on the record. And I was just going to suggest that there's some different ways to move forward. And one of those has already been discussed, which is a potential reconsideration. And I just want to clarify with our attorney that the way that works at the city of Reno is that either at the meeting or sometime before the agenda is posted, an item's put on the agenda for reconsideration. And we're just at that meeting voting on whether or not to reconsider the item, which would then come back at a further agenda once it's agendized. So that's how it works at Reno. I don't know how it would work here.
Your bylaws mirror that same procedure.
Okay. So that's one way to proceed. A different way to proceed, because that takes time, and regional planning only meets every 2 months or so, depending how we schedule our meetings. A different way to proceed, and I really don't know where the school board is in terms of putting their arms around the package. You mentioned the land isn't acquired yet, or the final land acquisition isn't completed. But a whole different way to do this is to put the two things together, the power line and the school project, in one package, and to move that through the process, and just bring it back without even having reconsideration votes or something like that. It seems like that's in other words, redefine the project. So, I don't know.
Excuse me, Jessica Prunty for the record. My understanding is that the school has not even yet been presented at all to the city of Sparks.
Correct.
There is a project for the movement of the lines. First, we have to move the utility corridor. So that would be the project of regional significance that would come to the RPC. And then if you guys call for it, that would come up to you. I think it would be very premature at this point in time to base your decision on what may or may not happen as far as what everyone thinks is going to be built on the site. This is a utility corridor, and then ultimately the lines that would go within it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm not trying to project what would be built on the site. I'm just offering that whatever is built or whatever is proposed, and whenever it is proposed, and wherever that is, that's the city of Sparks, I presume, that could potentially be packaged in a different way, and it ultimately could be considered without having to go through the whole reconsideration process. That's all I'm saying. And I don't know if your rules at Sparks allow for that, but I'm just trying to lay out some different paths.
Chair Burke Bigley, would you entertain a response?
Certainly.
Councilwoman Dewar, again, as I discussed earlier, if the school does not trip a project of regional significance, it doesn't come back. So to package them together, you're still simply looking at the review of a transmission line for 120 kilovolts to move from the middle of the property to the north.
One more question.
Your legal counsel would likely tell you you can't get into traffic and you can't
Right.
get into.
No, I understand. Do you, just since I'm not intimately directly involved with the school, could you just give us some, I see members of the school district staff here. Could you just give us a rough time frame of when they hope to present a school project? Is it 6 months, a year from now? I'm just curious.
Pete Etch, our Chief Operating Officer for the Washoe County School District. Our intention is to open this school in August of 2022. We hope to break ground on this school in roughly the beginning of 2020. Everything stays the same as it is right now through 2019, including the golf course. We hope to be bringing back well, first of all, I mean, this process, and again, I'm not a planner, but it's my understanding we can't even go in for a conditional use permit until we actually have a regional plan amendment. So we're kind of in a chicken and egg here situation here, that if we don't have an approval for the regional plan amendment, I can't even go forward with the plans for the school to submit to the city of Sparks.
Okay, thank you very much. And the reason I'm bringing this up is that we've heard from Mr. McKenzie a potential request for reconsideration, which could happen now or at the end of the meeting or even after the meeting. And so I just thought it was worthwhile to hear this, that would shed some light on what he's proposed and, maybe help us move forward. So.
Thank you, Ms. Dewar. I'm getting the high sign from our attorney that we are way into the weeds on this item. And so we need to stop our discussion on it now and move on to the next item. And so we will do that. Madam Executive Director.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Item 7C for possible action. This is a public hearing, Regional Plan Amendment 18-003. This is a possible adoption of a resolution regarding a mapping amendment regarding a new utility site and 2 new utility corridors, the East Truckee Canyon, and we have Nate Kusha to present.
Thank you, Madam Chair and board members. For the record, Nate Kusha, Regional Planning. This agenda item discusses the Sunnell Substation Regional Plan Amendment and can be found starting on page 97 of your packet. The Washoe County Board of Commissioners sponsored this amendment on July 24th, 2018. This request is a mapping amendment to maps 9 to 11 of the 2012 Truckee Meadows Regional Plan, adding a new regional utility site and 2 new regional utility corridors in the East Truckee River Canyon at 21505 Reno Technology Park West. Overhead is a map of the project site. Materials submitted indicate that the proposed project would support the expansion of the Apple Data Center. The map here shows the existing utility corridors and sites in orange and blue, as well as the proposed in purple and green, respectively. Overhead is the review criteria for Regional Governing Board, as also found in your packet on page 98. Team RPA staff finds this amendment to be consistent with the regional form and pattern due to the high concentration of utility sites and corridors in the area, and no other significant conformance issues were identified. On September 12th, 2018, the Regional Planning Commission moved to approve RPC Resolution 18-05, recommending that the board adopt the proposed amendment. Regional Planning staff recommends the board consider the Regional Plan Amendment as described in this staff report and adopt RPGB Resolution 18-05, which is attachment 3 of your staff report, adopting the proposed amendments to maps 9 through 11. You can find the suggested motion on the screen or on page 99 of your packet. This concludes my presentation. Team RPA staff as well as Washoe County staff are available for any questions.
Thank you very much. Commissioners, any questions? Yes, Commissioner Bybee.
So I'm just curious, since we just did another utility corridor, when we looked at this substation and this corridor, was there additional outside factors that we looked at on why, I can see our criteria here, but how much other information and data did you need in order to bring this through for our approval today?
Yeah, so as I stated, all of these factors were looked at purely on the substation and the new utility corridors. And all that was provided was that it was indicated in the materials that it would be in support of the expansion of the Apple Data Center.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Abbott. Mr. Abbott.
trying.
You're on.
Back on the map, the two corridors, I don't know, I just see one purple line. How do we separate?
So there's actually the green box is the new regional utility site. There is one corridor that kind of goes up and to the northeast. That is one corridor, and the one that goes south into
Okay.
Story County is the second.
I see it now. Thank you.
Mr. McKenzie.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and it's clearly stated in the staff report, this is to support an existing development that's been in the process for a number of years. It's not to support a new development.
Thank you, Mr. McKenzie. Any other questions, comments?
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Hartung.
motion to approve.
Second.
Did we do public comment?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Do we have any public comment on this issue?
I have none.
No public comment? Okay, seeing none, we will close public comment, bring it back. Now, Commissioner Hartung,
Motion to approve, Madam Chair.
we have a motion. Do I have a second?
I did, second.
Mr. Bobbsey.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those, do we need a voice vote, or all those in favor signify by saying aye?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Madam Director.
Madam Chair, on to item 7D for possible action. This is a discussion and possible action regarding the 2019 Truckee Meadows Regional Plan update. We have a variety of presenters for you today, including our own Laura Knox and Jeremy Smith, and we will start with our consultant, Terry Moore.
Welcome back, Mr. Moore.
Good afternoon. Happy to be here. For the record, Terry Moore, Echo Northwest, consultant to TMRPA on the regional plan. I'm going to take just a few minutes here to kick this off and start by talking about the process and our agenda for today. And this is what we've talked to you about this before. In general, this plan moves from goals, the things that matter and you're trying to achieve, to scenarios that show land use alternatives that might be consistent with achieving those things, to policies that would help implement those scenarios. And that's the order that we will be talking about things today. I'm first up talking about goals, and I'll remind you where we were. Last month, we came to you with some ideas about goal categories that the RPC had told us, had given us authority to bring to you. Those categories are the 6 titles on the left in bold. You gave us opinions about that and gave us some suggested and told us to develop, when we talked to the RPC, they told us to go ahead and develop some language that went with that. We also showed that to you at the last meeting, and you gave us some amendments to that. Right now, and then after that, we took those amendments back to the RPC yesterday, and they gave us some amendments. And then after we made those amendments, we found a typo that we wanted to fix. So what that means is that the amendments in goal number 1 are the ones that you gave us. The amendments in goal number 4, cost and efficiency, the first one is one that the RPC gave us, asking us to include public services as well as public facilities, which made sense to us. And the last 2, changing the word urban to regional, is just a cleanup because that urban referred to our first goal, quality of urban living, which you told us to change to quality of regional living. So that's just fixing that up. So that right now, those are the amendments. What the RPC told us yesterday was they unanimously approved a motion that said, we would like you to take these goals with our approval to the governing board and an important and make any changes that you think our discussion about these yesterday reflected. The one change that we made based on their discussion was the and provide public services, but I want to also tell you that they talked about a couple of other things that we are going to be covering in various ways today and in the next round of this. In addition to that direct change, they talked quite a bit about making sure that our evaluation criteria dealt with jobs housing balance. And when Jeremy Smith gets up here today, you'll see what kind of progress we're making on that. They asked us to pay particular attention to affordable housing and the diversity of housing provided. They did not ask us to change the goals, but as you know from other work that your director has talked to you about, there's going to be a lot in the plan about housing. And with that, I think there were a couple of other minor things, but they will come up as policy issues that we're dealing with. So at this point, we have these revised goals in front of you, and that's what we're working on right now. And per our conversation with you last time, we're working from these goals to create evaluation criteria that we're using to talk about how well the scenarios that we're developing are performing against those goals. And the scenarios is the next topic, unless you have any questions for me.
Any questions? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. For the record, I'm Jeremy Smith. I'm the GIS coordinator at Regional Planning. I tend to talk too much, so I'm setting my timer. Okay, scenarios. We've talked a little bit about scenarios so far. Today I'm going to show you where we're at. We're quite a bit further than the last time we chatted. Also happy to be back here in the home court, because I think we were at a restaurant, and then we were at Sparks Police, so now we're back here in our spot. Just to remind you that we're talking about doing 4 distinct scenarios for the regional plan update. That's what we've created. The first 2, historical and trends, 1 and 2, those are really scenarios from the housing study we completed 2 years ago. The historical, just to, again, to remind you, was what if we mimic as best we can with the available land the previous 15 years? So we did the study in 2015. We said, what happened between 2000 and 2015? And then we tried to build that out to 2035, I believe. And then the second one, this trends or McCarran scenario, as we called it, that's the one where we said, well, okay, what if we just get a little more dense and we put 25% of that growth we're forecasting inside the McCarran ring? Wasn't anything more than everyone can recognize the McCarran ring, and that seemed like a good place to give a shot. So we have those 2, and they were pretty successful, and they showed differences in cost, and you guys probably remember that. Now we've moved on to 3 and 4. And this is where we're really trying to push it even further. We're trying to get more innovative about how we're approaching these future scenarios, especially in terms of density. And where we try to find that density varies. So on the edge, or what we've called compact suburban development, and often we refer to it as smart greenfield, we're trying to take advantage of our developing areas, our PUDs and tentative map areas, but looking for opportunities to maximize density and connectivity to infrastructure in that scenario. And then there's a very classic sort of infill scenario that we're trying to build as well that really densifies in the core and the mixed use areas, right? Downtowns, that sort of thing, the regional centers. So that's sort of the 4 scenarios that we have that we're working on. To get there, to create all 4 of those, there are really these kind of 3 main steps, at least for me as the scenario creator guy at the computer, that I have to try to get through. Now, we've talked a lot about the first one, characteristics that affect development. That's sitting out here in the 95% zone. Pretty much we've got that solved. In fact, we've done some work recently in my coworker Damian Kerwin, this guy right here, who's our GIS analyst, has got that first part online now. So we'll send you a link and you can actually go play around with the spreadsheet and see what comes out. It still needs a little refinement, but we're making some good progress there. The allocation code, I've been really, burning the candle at both ends here and trying to get that allocation code written, and we've been able to allocate the residential side. Certainly create some first drafts of new scenarios. So that's actually working. So that's more in the maybe 50, 60% zone. And then the evaluation, this is where we create metrics that are the result of where we put these future units. We've also got work completed on that, maybe more in the 30% zone. We have some more work to do there. So these things are all happening simultaneously. We're making progress on all of them. Let's talk about each one quickly. We've done this a lot. So here's the spreadsheet for characteristics. These are the things that you can weight, right, and get a different sort of lens. And what we're trying to do here is pick the pieces of data that relate to a given scenario. So if it's an infill scenario, we're going to want to pick stuff that, just going to drive where the units want to go into the center of town, into that core area. And you know, you can sort of change how that goes. One thing that did come up at the Regional Planning Commission last night was the concept of stormwater. Stormwater data, as I think I've presented to you in the past, is there are gaps in stormwater data. It's tough to apply it holistically across, but it is a consideration that we're obviously trying to work in. We're working with several different folks on different stormwater projects, WRWC, NDEP, RCI. So we're well aware of that, and this thing is modular, and hopefully we'll be able to get that built in at some point. If you remember, this is what we weighted the factors for the live, work, play composite. This is trying to capture the concept of the infill scenario. And so we have things like how frequently does transit come by, where does the transit go, where are the bike lanes, the density of the kind of employment types that you would associate with a live, work, play, taking transit to your job kind of thing, where are they? And then some other stuff like distance to green space and distance to the downtown core. And you may remember this from over at Sparks PD. This was the quartiles, right? This is how that live, work, play gets then realized on hexagons. The top scoring hexagons are the blue blob. And so this model now is gonna, for this scenario, is gonna try to drive growth into the blue blob. That's kind of what's going on here. If you do a different weighting, you're gonna get different blobs. But this is the one we have for the infill scenario as of right now. Now, once we have those pieces in place, the characteristics, right, then we can move on to the allocation, because now we know geographically where we want to drive that growth. And there's really 4/5 types of land that we can use to allocate new future units into. Obviously, vacant land that's zoned residential is number one. That's quite a big chunk of land. But there are other options too, like underutilized land. You might have a 4-acre parcel with one old farmhouse on it, and the zoning allows for 8 units. And so you could realize 7 more units on that built land, because you might not want to, but you could. You can also redevelop land, right? You can tear down a building, tear down an office building, put in an apartment building or whatever. So that's another way to get at units. Of course, you have to subtract some stuff if you do that. And then there's this concept of upzoning, right? And this is where you may remember my silly late night Jeremy's cubes of weirdness, where we were looking at different dimensions, right, of the 4 scenarios. This is when I was thinking about policy change and how much a scenario is going to trigger policy change. Really, I was talking about zoning change and upzoning lands that currently today might be zoned for a moderate density single-family product. Maybe we want to move them into apartments because that's the need that we think we have in our community. That obviously there's a big process to do that. We're not suggesting that we do that, but we're going to look in the scenarios at doing that as a way to test what the impacts might be. And then the 5th type is the ADU or accessory dwelling unit conversation that's, I know, happening right now. I think it's going to the Reno City Council soon for a decision. And there's obviously a way to gain capacity for dwelling units by allowing accessory dwelling units to exist as well. So those are our 5 types. This was, I think, something I mentioned at our last meeting, but this is now another way to slice the land inside the TMSA. And this is important because this is how we're going to target different percentages of our future allocation. These are what we're calling neighborhood categories. And I need to probably work on the names a little bit, but certainly developing areas make sense. Those are the purple areas, and that's where we have existing planned unit developments, we have existing tentative maps. They may not be moving a lot right now as far as building units, but they are on the books. So that's one area. We also have in the blue, the employment areas. These are employment-dominated areas. They may have some residential zoning inside them, but it's not a lot. And so it's kind of its own unique category. And then we have in yellow, or it's really supposed to be green, but it looks yellow to me, existing neighborhoods. That's the stuff that's built where we live, probably, right? And so there are some opportunities for ADUs, some infill in there, maybe even some redevelopment, but primarily built, maybe some vacant lots. And then this is one of the 2 next categories are ones I want to work on defining a little better. It's not just mixed use, it's mixed use / core areas, because it's that big red swath. And given the hexagon framework we're working with, we sometimes overlap. And so it's based around where we have mixed use in the master plans of Reno and Sparks. That is where that red is, but it's a little bit more expansive than just that, right? So it's really mixed use core areas. And then finally, the orange stuff on the outer edge, hopefully you can distinguish. Yeah, you guys have green, good. The orange areas, those are rural or low density residential areas where sagebrush, hills, right? 5-acre parcels or 40-acre parcels, even stuff like that. So those are the neighborhood types and they're geographic. And so that will make now sense when we go here. Now, I failed to do a very good job on the first column there, but I took you through it over at the Sparks PD. And basically, D1 is the low-density suburban, D2 is moderate-density suburban, D3 is the missing middle kind of housing, townhomes, single-family attached, that kind of thing. D4 is moderate-density multifamily, and D5 is high-density multifamily. We looked at pictures of all that stuff. And now, over across the top, you can see there are those neighborhood types I just mentioned. And if we're trying to reach some 100% of the future goal we have, and in this case we're shooting for around 44,000 units, these are the percentages of how we're trying to meet that demand by density type and also by neighborhood type. So basically, if you add up everything inside, let's see if I can get, that's not gonna work. Everything that's colored, right? I think you should see maybe green and blue, that should add to 100. You might notice also below there's 65 and 35. This is the infill scenario control totals or targets. So 65% of the future growth we're trying to allocate into existing neighborhoods and into those core areas. 35% being realized in the developing areas and out maybe in the rural zone. When we talk about our smart greenfield scenario we're also building, it's flipped. 65% of that new growth is gonna go into the developing areas and rural areas, and then 35% is slated to go into the mixed-use centered Todd areas and existing neighborhoods. So this is how we're approaching it. This is the target. And then, of course, you have to turn that into actual real units. This is a bit of an old matrix, I think, but you get the idea that if it's a percent over here, right? In this case, existing neighborhoods, for example, these are actual unit counts that the model will try to fulfill by looking at those different land types that I mentioned. So that's what's going on. We even took it a step further, and we created this really, insane spreadsheet because, in fact, those targets may not be achievable on vacant land. So here, we've been able to put together capacity versus targets, and then understand where we have surpluses and deficits by different density types in different neighborhoods. And by that, you can probably see over on the right there's some red, a negative 1,500 in that D3 column, negative 1,659. Those are areas where we didn't have the vacant land available today per our existing zoning, per the planning that we've all done, that we're adhering to from the jurisdictions. So we took a chance at some of that upzoning for some of that to achieve that, and I'm gonna show you where we did that. So let's take a look at this supply side stuff, the land. Here is a footprint of vacant land on parcels. Now, we've had this discussion before, and you guys have asked me how many units are out there right now today, and I think I said around 90,000. Well, some of that was being sort of downplayed because of the mixed-use areas. Number one, our mixed-use areas do not have a maximum, so we've top set maximums, and I think they're reasonable. But also we were applying another factor to it, which was a kind of a percent realization factor, and that was based on our housing study work. But in order to just sort of open this up for experimentation, to push a little bit in terms of scenarios, we relaxed that. And what that does is it bumps up the number by about 16,000 more units. So right now, our vacant capacity in the modeling work is around 106,000 dwelling units. Sure.
Certainly.
So let me get this clarified here.
You got it.
Based upon existing PUDs or special use plans or existing zoning, without any changes, without any additions to any new vacant land into that model, we could build 106 units.
Correct.
Okay. Wanted to make sure we had
106,000.
106,000.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay.
Okay, so that's the vacant footprint. We also did this work to develop where we might find the underutilized lands that I mentioned. Those are lands that, again, the key was that the zoning that is there now today, these lands are built, but the zoning could allow for more units. So that was a criteria. We looked for only things that were 1/3 acre in size or larger, and also I limited it to just single-family detached. And so by doing that, that purple footprint is where those lands are, and it gets us around 15,000 more potential units that we could put on that kind of land. That doesn't mean we have to use all those, but they're out there. And then also redevelopment. So there are actually some defined redevelopment areas per the City of Reno Master Plan, for example. That's the blue areas, redevelopment areas 1 and 2. I think that the red area in Sparks, it might not be perfect with their identified redevelopment area, but it's their mixed-use area, so we might refine that a bit, but it's pretty close. And then in green are areas identified by the staff at Washoe County that they thought might be good candidates for redevelopment, Sun Valley Corridor and Old Verdi. So it's a pretty limited scope area. I actually ended up calculating it for everywhere, but this seemed like enough. The criteria was pretty straightforward. We didn't want to redevelop anything that's built since 2000. So if you had a year built of 2000 or greater, you were out. No single-family detached stuff, no open space, no public facilities. But if you're employment use or you're maybe even a multifamily, that was fair game. And then there was one final criteria that really kind of limited quite a bit, and that was that the assessed land value needed to be equivalent or greater than the assessed building value. So the land value is high while the building value may be low. That's often used as a way to identify lands that could redevelop. Okay, and then finally, this concept of upzoning to meet some of those deficits that I found, and the deficits in capacity, again, were based on the targets we set ahead of time. And then I went and looked at what was zoned and saw in the different neighborhoods and different density classes and found that we were maybe 3,600 units shy for our smart greenfield scenario, and we made 3,150 units shy in the infill scenario. So I went and identified hexagon areas that were zoned for the density class 2, the moderate density suburban, right? We have a lot of that. If you may remember from the housing study, that's our biggest category, the DeMonte Ranches, Somersets, that sort of thing. There's a lot of that on the books to be built. And so I was able to pick, based on the quartiles, the blue blob, right? I was able to pick hexagons that were high performing for the scenario and also had a lot of density class 2 capacity, and I could turn that into density class 3 or density class 4 in these specific areas. It doesn't have to be these areas. These are just the areas that I chose to get through it. And these are the kinds of things that, can be discussed for a given scenario. When I did the upzoning, I assumed pretty high realization within the range of the density class. So I wasn't like I turned on density class 3 and I only built 8 units per acre. I went to 13. All right, so that's how we got that capacity. And so we used all of that as the background to allocate into, and I'm going to show you the allocations here in a sec. But finally, we have to talk about the evaluation as well, because this is an important part. I mean, this is really why we're doing this, right? Is to inform us about the impacts of growing one way versus another, so that as we craft the policy in the regional plan update, we're thinking about why we want to put certain policies together or not, based on understanding how a land pattern is going to impact important things that we do, like wastewater treatment or potable water delivery, or how many acres we want to build on, or some of this stuff on the right. What's the jobs housing balance, vehicle miles traveled, right? Impacts to schools, et cetera. Right now today we have the stuff in green, which I'll show you for the 4 scenarios, and we are working on getting some of these other metrics in there as well. And so this might not be an exhaustive list still, but we're actually making progress and we have metrics to show you. So what we're going to do is do that, get those metrics together, look at all 4 scenarios, and start to think what's good about this one but not so good about this one, what's good about scenario 2 but not great about scenario 2, figure that out, and then try to build a preferred alternative that takes the good pieces that we want from all of them into one future scenario that will ultimately become the regional plan map that will help guide our planning processes as we move forward. So, this is just I can generate a lot of stats tables thing. Everything's,
me.
oh yeah.
We have a question.
Oh, sure.
Jeremy, can you go back one?
Of course.
So as you're looking at metrics calculated, are the green metrics you've already calculated?
Yes.
And the ones on the right you will be calculating?
That's exactly right.
So how do we, and obviously what jumps out at me is the wastewater treatment impact. Will that be, how is that quantified, or how do we see
show you
that?
an example,
Okay.
2 slides, and you'll be able to see exactly how we're doing it.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
You betcha. This is just pointing out that, in fact, we have the capacity to change things and to do this again, and this doesn't turn off because for the most part, this is an automated process now. I'm building code to do it. Still a lot of manual stuff that has to happen, but you know, you can get a lot of stats quickly through the code, so that's good. Okay, and then obviously, the evaluation metrics are needed to be looked at in terms of the goals that Terry talked about up front. You know, those are the goals of the regional plan update of our new plan. And so the reason to have these metrics and then to evaluate them annually is in terms of the goals. And it seems to me that it's not a one-for-one. It's not like we have a measurement that says regional quality of life. We have wastewater, or we've got something else, acres realized. So each metric may apply to more than one goal, and we're working out how we're going to be able to present that sort of matrix. Okay, well, without further ado, let's take a look at some of these realizations on the landscape. And if you want a closer look on your way out, you can check out a nice glossy printout of all four. So this is the classic scenario from the housing study. And what we're seeing here are two things on the map. The smaller, sort of behind the scenes blue with the kind of light blue outline, or the light blue, those are the hexagon, that's the hexagon footprint. So that's how many hexes got selected. But then the darker blue circles, those are the number of units. So the larger the circle, the more units are being realized in that area. Because we know that depending on your density class, you could realize 100 units, on an acre parcel, or 1 unit on an acre parcel, depending on your zoning, right? So I thought maybe these circles would help us to kind of see where we're realizing units in this scenario. And again, the total number of units, I had to kind of truncate some of the unit growth from the housing study. It was a little more aggressive in the total projection. But 44,440 units. And if you look up at that first pie chart, you'll see that that's by neighborhood type. So the neighborhood map type I showed you, and that neighborhood map is based on your existing master plan land uses, right? Where do we have residential zoning, where are employment areas, where are mixed use areas, et cetera. This is what is being realized over the landscape. 51% of this future allocation is happening in like PUD and tentative map areas. And the other one the other ones are split up between existing neighborhoods and the mixed use zones. With terms of acres is totaling up all of the unconstrained acres on the property and that are, units are being built on. This one is by far the most expansive at 16,617. This old classic scenario uses the most acreage. And a lot of that, of course, is in the developing areas. Then we have something called the water hookup fee cost. Now, this is where I took, the geographic location in the TMSA or in the Truckee Meadows Water Authority service area matters with regard to what you pay as a developer or home builder to hook up to the water system. If you're inside the middle of town, there's certain areas where it's zero. You just hook up. As you move out, it's pretty much the further you go from the core, the more expensive the hookup fees become. And so if you're building out using a lot of acres going to the edge, you're going to incur a lot of hookup fee costs for water. That's important because, while the resident does not directly pay that cost, if you're going to buy a new home, that cost is going to get added in to the cost of the home, right? So it's important that if we can, we try to minimize that, especially in terms of things like affordable housing or having diversity, of housing choice. So that's how we came up with the water hookup fee cost. It's simply where you fall, where that unit falls, and what Tomo has said the cost is. There is a problem in here, some assumptions that Jeremy Smith made, and that is that outside, the TMSA is larger than the Tumwa service area. And so there are some areas where we have PUDs that don't have an existing documented hookup fee. I made it, the highest one that's documented was 12,700 or something. I made everything outside of it 15,000. We can talk about that number if we want to, but just to give you pull the curtain back. So there's probably a better way to do that, but it would probably be more. Anyway, that's a great metric that we can see how much that would cost. Then finally, to your point, Councilwoman Bybee, about wastewater. On the bottom graph there, I've got wastewater generation in million gallons per day for each of the treatment facilities. So the first one is the Cold Springs facility, then Lemon Valley, coming in at 0.39, Rasborf, Renostead at 0.9, South Truckee Meadows 1.68, and Tumwharf at 4.41. This would be the additional million gallons per day that these 44,440 units would generate, based on where they locate, which plant they would go to. So I used a factor of 175 gallons per day per household. That's a pretty middle-of-the-road factor from what I understand. You know, some folks think 225. We've looked at the data and water meter data. In the winter, it's more like 150. So 175 is a pretty conservative estimate, I think. And it's interesting to watch how these change as we go through the scenarios. Okay, so now you know how I've kind of presented the metrics to you, what we're looking at over there on the right and hopefully on the left. If you have questions, no problem. But, yeah?
Madam Chair, quick question.
Sure.
So Jeremy, on that generation, say for Tom Wharf, do you have a further, I'm sure you have the ability to, but do you have a further breakdown of that 4.41? How much is generated by this new housing that will be in Sparks versus Reno versus the county?
Yes, we could overlay a jurisdictional
Okay.
set of boundaries, and we could sure get that out of there.
Okay.
I will say that our approach has been to stay, at least so far, you know, to stay non-jurisdictional in an attempt to really kind of think regionally. But
Yeah.
yes, absolutely we can.
And the only reason I ask is because of our allocations
Sure.
that the three of us have, at least for Tom Wharf, not,
It would
not
be
for the
very
others, but
worthwhile to-
I'm looking at the Tom Wharf
Makes total
situation.
sense. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
Thank you.
Yep. So those are the metrics. Let's take a look now from Classic to McCarran. So now you may notice that there's a little less development out, you know, I always like doing this trick where you go back and forth. Look at the core. It really kind of expands with red, right? So there's more. We know 25% is going into that McCarran ring. You can see we're using a little less land in the developing areas. The acres are down to 9,800. And look at the water hookup fee costs have come down below, you know, it was 240 million, now it's at 185 million. That's because we're moving things closer in, more units are paying less. But you may also notice that the burden to the Tumwar facility has gone up by 0.4 something million gallons per day. And that's at 20 years, that's at the full realization, right? So if we have capacity, which I know we do, and I know that there's not absolute certainty on what the capacity at Tumwharf is right now based on some of the things that those folks are doing a good job of dealing with out there, you know, we have 20 years basically to deal with that. It's not like we're not gonna hit any threshold in 5 or 7 or 10 years at that facility, is my understanding. But it is interesting to see how they change. Let's go now to the infill scenario. So I've got a little out of order here because all of the things I showed you as far as capacity and leading up were about infill. And so I just kind of wanted to show you the next one. You can just kind of see the yellow stuff is it's more concentrated inside the middle of the TMSA. But there is this issue, and it has to do with how we set up the variables for the live, work, play, and also our targets, what we targeted. But look at the number of acres. It's about 12,000 acres are being used. This scenario is going to need a little tweaking. This is a first draft of this. We would assume that it would be quite a bit lower. We did some math today. If we just reduce the number of units that we're trying to achieve in the rural zone, that rural neighborhood, we can bring this total acreage down to something around 7,500. So I think with just a little tweaking of our targets, keeping that 65-35 split, keeping the market share by density class the same, but just changing from rural into developing areas, we're gonna bring that down because we don't think it's reasonable that an infill scenario would use more acres than, you know, one that is not an infill scenario. But look at the water hookup fee cost has come down significantly. I mean, you could just take a look at that pie chart, back to the acres thing for a second. Look at that second pie chart. I mean, 8,074 acres in rural. That's just because things are being selected that are 40 acres and have really low density zoning. So we're gonna get that. And also take a look, if you will, at the wastewater generation. 0 at the Cold Springs facility. That's the first time I've seen that happen. And but 5.9 at Tumwharf. So obviously, you know, where we decide to build is going to have differential impacts on the things that we manage and take care of for the community. Finally, the greenfield scenario. This is where this one's at. Similar to, I think, kind of the McCarran thing, but obviously different locations. You know, one interesting that popped out to me was that when we ran those previous scenarios, we didn't have a Stonebrook approved. So it never shows up on anything, but now in this one, it does, because now it is approved and out there as capacity, so that's interesting. I guess that's the third highest water hookup fee cost of all of them. So this is the direction we're going with the scenarios, and we're gonna have more metrics, and we're gonna be able to use that kind of lens to you know, make hopefully a good decision about where we really want our our regional plan map and our preferred scenario to move forward. So with that, I think I'm almost done. Do you guys have any other questions before I go on to like the next steps?
Any questions, commissioners? Doesn't look like it.
No? Okay, good. I just think one more slide. Next steps, I got to get employment built in. We're going to fix the metrics, and we are going to send you the online tool so you can start messing around with the those characteristics and build your own lens. And then you can say, Jeremy, allocate this for me. And then one day when I have time, I will. 3 a.m. That's right. Thank you. Okay, Terry, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks. Terry Moore for the record. I just want to say a couple of things about this to tie it together. First of all, I'm not sure that Jeremy said this exactly, but it's really important that you understand that what we're looking at in these scenarios is 4 different ways that the 3 jurisdictions can develop their master plans over the next 20 years. We are not creating new master plans for those jurisdictions. And what these maps point out is that there is more capacity for growth inside the TMSA, given the vacant land, than there is demand projected for 20 years. So that gives a lot of flexibility on how that might happen. And our endeavor is to try to show different ways that it could happen, and then some metrics about what to do about that. The second thing I want to say, just to let you know, going on the record as a consultant, my opinion about this tool, which is, it is pretty impressive. Right now, first of all, it lets us create alternatives, and it has taken a while to get here, there's no doubt about that. But allows us to create alternatives, and what we found today was just how important it was to us in our ability to check our assumptions. So we can now throw the alternatives up there, and in real time, Jeremy can show us how we're getting to that, what decisions we made a month ago that are making certain things happen. So, and that further allows us then to check calculations. And finally, in the end, when we're done with this, it's going to allow us to document how we got to the alternatives that we did and how you got to the preferred alternative that you did. And the other thing that Jeremy has done throughout is he's been paying attention not just to this exercise, but to the ability to use these data in the long run. So when we get to talking to you at the next meeting about policies, we're going to be able to talk about the kinds of annual reports that TMRPA may be able to give you that are consistent with your goal statements and how performance is going vis-a-vis those goal statements on the ground and with the planning. So I guess my final comment is, the reason I'm grateful for this is because so far it has been able to meet all of our unreasonable expectations about what it should do. And I feel relatively confident that we're going to be able to bring to you next month these alternatives with the measures attached to them that allow you time in your joint work session for a rich discussion about what's working and what's not and where you want to go with the preferred alternative.
Okay, for the record, Lauren Knox with Regional Planning. So now that we've seen what Jeremy has presented, we really want to talk to you about the implementation of that work. Staff and the consultant team has been working on evaluating and developing policies for the updated regional plan. You've already seen some of these concepts, but we shared this with the RPC, the Regional Planning Commission, last night, and so we wanted to provide you with the same information as well as the feedback that they gave us. I want to point out at this point, these are just concepts. All the details haven't been hammered out, nor is this everything in regards to new policy. We've really been working on developing new policies. There's a lot going on with that. In the near future, it's going to be going to our working group, the Regional Planning Commission, and then to this board as well. So you'll see that soon. The next few slides really represent kind of the larger shifts in policy concept that we're contemplating right now. So one policy concept that we're working on is the idea of tiering within the TMSA as a way to prioritize growth. You saw in the work that Jeremy presented that we're really working to identify areas where it's more appropriate to grow in the near term based on a variety of factors, including things like public services and infrastructure. Doing this can provide more certainty on where public services and infrastructure investments can direct growth and really optimize public dollars. It effectively ties land use closer with facilities plans as well as capital improvements. Additionally, it's a way to discuss and implement concurrency of growth and land use decisions with services and infrastructure. Through a variety of surveys and issues identification discussion, it was recognized that there's a strong voice right now by the public, the appointed and elected officials, to have a stronger focus on natural resources within our plan. In fact, the Regional Planning Commission meetings in the past and last night, there's a lot of discussion around the loss of open space. It popped, it's been popping, so we're very keen to that. Also, the current regional plan really has a small section on natural resources, and we feel at this point in time it's really imperative that we discuss the future of our surrounding environment in the region. We are developing a survey right now to actually dig deeper and determine what it is that's wanted and valued regionally with respect to the natural environment. We're going to utilize the information that we gain to also further develop policies related to this concept. So we also have some process changes that we're looking at. For conformance reviews, we've heard from the Regional Planning Commission as well as local government staff that getting in the process early would really be beneficial in adding value to the project review. This allows regional planning to take a more proactive role in review and ideally will help provide information in regards to projects as it relates to the regional plan at the front end. What we're really trying to do there is kind of marry our data work that we've got a great handle on now, as well as our conformance review work. So additionally, we're looking into having 2 paths to determine conformance of master plan amendments in projects of regional significance. One path would be the prescriptive path, and the other would be performance-based outcomes. Also, we'd really like to take advantage of the annual reporting opportunity that's presented to us in state statute and develop a regional annual report. This will provide a path to determine how the region is collectively functioning against the goals, policies, and evaluative criteria that will be agreed upon in the updated plan. It allows us as a region to shift and adjust as needed to reach regional goals. Another idea relatively tied to the annual report is the idea of an annual awards program that can recognize actions taken further to implement the regional plan. This would be voluntary in nature, not subject to the regulatory framework. And it's basically another layer to really implement the constructs of the updated regional plan. So just to recap in this presentation, Terry covered goals, Jeremy covered scenarios, and I covered some policy ideas. Last night at the Regional Planning Commission, the RPC made a motion to recommend that the RPGB approve of the goals as discussed in today's presentation. And we're looking for a motion on those goals as well as any other feedback that you might have for us in regards to the presentation.
Thank you very much. Good presentation. Very interesting map scenario, Jeremy. Good job. I'm fascinating. Commissioners, any questions, comments? Wow. That's what we're hearing. Wow. Thank you guys very much. Yes.
Madam Chair, if I may, unfortunately, Councilmember Breckus had to drop off the line, so she asked that we call her back when this is over, so we're doing that right now. Thank you.
Okay, good.
All circuits are busy now. Please try your call again later.
Want to dial it one more time and see if you can get through? These are yours, right? No, thanks.
Hello, this is Jenny.
Hi, Jenny. This is Marcia calling you back. We're calling you back. The presentation on the discussion of the Truckee Meadows regional plan.
Okay, I can't hear you, but I'll just
I did watch it and then I turned off, so hopefully you have no feedback now. But I just wanted to thank staff for the presentation. I thought it was very informative. I think the hexagon work is going to be helpful to those of us as we make our investment decisions, whether it's on the wastewater treatment investments that are coming our way, or over at Tumwa as we do area charge work. So I think that's exciting. I'm just looking forward to the evolution of that, to really start to dial down jurisdiction, what's appropriate in one jurisdiction and what's appropriate in another. And I'm talking about the incorporated, unincorporated divide. I think that needs to go beyond just numbers and talk about community character. And I'm looking forward to that exercise. And maybe it's going to be a mapping exercise that has to go around the valley and show where it's appropriate to divide those unincorporated, incorporated divisions, because I think that's been a source of a lot of strife and competition among the jurisdictions. So I'm looking to see how those evolve. And also looking to see that the hexagon work doesn't overemphasize past trends, but set paths for us to make public investment choices to get to the scenarios that we finally end up. And then just mindful that, this work is leading up to annexation programs and to sphere of influence designations, and be curious to see how we go into that. And then just the last thing is, I saw the emphasis on the annual work program and the reports, and also the discussion about facilities versus capital. And I think that is going to be fodder for discussion on what we just discussed about the regional plan amendment. Never been married to projects of regional significance, but they are in place, and I'm just wondering if maybe, say, for example, the school CIP, which if it had come through us and been found in conformance, maybe, that's adequate determination that could have been made. I do believe that a high school and even a middle school has regional implications and should not be exempt from this process, but how we get there, I think, is going to be an interesting element that I think the plan is going to have to discuss and determine, particularly if a high school hasn't gone through a project of regional significance as land set aside in a PUD that then, in itself went through a project of regional significance. So I think the jurisdiction, the subject entities, CIPs, and the projects of regional significance are going to be pretty important components too as we move forward. And I'm going to just drop off the line and thank everyone for putting up with me calling in today, because I know it's not easy to have someone come in and out of meetings. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Any other comments from commissioners? Commissioner.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And I think that Commissioner Bybee brought up a good point about the allocations on the treatment plants, because those allocations have a major bearing on where we can accept growth. Because if there's capacity in a plant, if that's not an allocation to a jurisdiction, and the area that you're trying to grow is in your matrix is in that area, that there's no capacity, then it's going to be a major contributor in the ability to do that. So I'm glad she brought that point up, because it's one that's weighing on all of our heads as we look at our treatment facilities and what we're doing with them in the future. Because where we thought that freshwater was going to be our issue in this area, it's not freshwater. It's how we take care of the wastewater.
Thank you, Mr. McKenzie. Anything else? I am looking for a motion as written on the screen to approve the goals.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. We have any public comment on this? I see no public comment, so we'll close public comment, bring it back to the board. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Madam Director.
Madam Chair, we are at item 8A, reports for possible action, members and directors' reports. Madam Chair, I can identify that one of the things that will be happening is we will start to take some of this scenario work out to the community and have some conversations. So the very first conversation we're going to have is with the affected entities as identified in Nevada Revised Statute. The goal here is to bring some feedback to the joint meeting that we're looking to schedule in November with the RPC and the RPGB, so that you have the opportunity to consider that as well as we talk about scenarios. So that's a heads up, just in case some people start to ask questions around that. We are available, and feel free to give us a call on that. We also want to share with you, we have created a site that has all of the work that we have done on the regional plan update, plus other documents that may be useful, including the master plans from the 3 jurisdictions, the materials that we've presented. That site is one that we will share. We'll send an email to you that shares the address for you, and you can take a look at those as well. So we just want to make sure that you have access to everything as we move forward. Finally, in conversation with the chair earlier today, as I mentioned, we are looking to schedule a joint meeting with the RPC and the RPGB in November. Originally, we talked November 15th and 16th. Those do not seem like they're working well, so my question today is if November 19th, which is a Monday, the Monday of Thanksgiving week, is a possibility for a 2 to 3 hour joint session with the RPC. And so if we could at least, anybody flag if they have some issues with that, I can go ahead and doodle that out. Go ahead.
Baby day. Sorry, I don't want to say that on the mic. Baby day.
Oh, baby day.
I'm thinking the baby's coming before then, but even, yeah, so
So
it's
we'll,
not gonna go well. It's all
the
right.
baby's going to come before that. We have
Yeah,
total
but
faith.
mom's not gonna be happy if dad's not around for the first couple of days to help
Madam
out.
Chair, we are open to other dates if there are suggestions. We're shooting for, mid to, we could also look at that last week in November, if that's the one that may potentially work with folks, and I see a no over there. We're probably going to wind up with a date that doesn't work for everybody, unfortunately.
That's the way it goes.
And that's the way that
So
happens.
can you say again, what was the first day?
The 19th's kind of an issue if we do a late afternoon, because I believe that we have a special event for a special mayor.
Oh, that's right.
Oh, that's
So-
right.
Right.
So if we did it on the 19th, it would have to
We'd
be
have to do it in the
an
morning.
earlier day meeting so that we could assure that we didn't conflict with that event.
So if we
Because
do
you'd
something
have
in
to
the
have a
morning.
quorum walkout on it.
Okay,
Yeah, because we're
Walking
sort of
around.
all tied up.
yeah. Then I'm going to ask the question, would you also look at your calendars for Tuesday, November 20th? Tuesday, November 20th.
Well, I know what's fine for me.
So. Right. And
So not in the morning?
And just so you know, I won't be here then either.
That week?
Right, that week. It's Thanksgiving week.
Correct. And we had attempted to try November 15th and 16th, and we were not able to get enough commitment.
When did we try that?
I sent out a doodle poll 3 weeks ago.
On the 15th, 16th?
Yes.
Okay. Well,
Could-
maybe
could
we
you
should
resend that?
reevaluate.
I would do
15th,
better that
16th.
following week. Yeah.
Well, what about the,
26th.
what about the 29th?
Yep.
The what?
The 29th,
Worked for me.
November 29th. What's that? Okay. But we're getting closer.
Or the 26th or the 27th. I know Sparks and County, do you have anything?
Yeah, they have their
We
meeting.
That-
canceled our BOC meeting.
26th or the 27th?
The 26th, there is a council meeting. However, I'm hearing the 27th potentially.
Oh, wait.
Wait a minute, we may have a meeting on the
I
27th.
think you guys do.
Yeah, I think
Did
we
you have something
canceled,
on the 26th?
we canceled the 20th, but I don't think we canceled the 27th.
Sparks, you guys on the 27th? Oh, that's right. Oh, so the 27th
And then,
is-
are you gonna still be gone the 30th?
I leave the 27th for
Oh.
2 weeks.
So she may be the only one, but I could definitely do the 29th or 30th.
Okay. 29th or 30th?
I could do the 29th or the 30th.
Unfortunately, without Councilmember Bybee, if that's the case.
Yeah.
All right.
You guys could schedule it with that meeting.
Okay,
I will move forward with those dates and be back in touch. I'd like to get this set in a week.
okay.
So, thank you.
And the next regularly scheduled meeting is December 13th?
That is correct, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Okay.
December 13th.
Item 8B, legal counsel report.
No, that's okay, go ahead. You're doing fine.
Thank you, Madam Director. Jessica Proning, for the record, nothing to report. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well,
Any Board of Trustee comments?
Yes, I can, there's a lot of work underway, and I thought I'd just give an update on a number of different projects. We have a lot of exciting new work that's happening. Our 3 new schools elementary schools are continuing to move along on schedule. We have the Desert Skies, it's actually a middle school in Sun Valley, the Sky Ranch Middle School in Spanish Springs, and the Nick Pulikitis Elementary School in South Reno, which is our favorite. Say the new name of the school for everyone at the school district, Pulikitis Elementary School. I love that name. These first 3 schools will open by next school year in August of 2019. We have 2 new schools scheduled to open the following year in 2020. These will be an elementary school in Spanish Springs and a new middle school in Arrow Creek. The land has been secured for both of those schools. We hope to open 2 more schools in 2021. These are 2 elementary schools in the North Valleys, one on Sky Vista across from the Regional Sports Complex and one in the Cold Springs area. And the land for the elementary school on Sky Vista has been secured. The site for Cold Springs is in process. And in fact, the district is holding a community forum to discuss the new elementary school in Cold Springs at 6 p.m. on October 30th at Cold Springs Middle School. No plans are finalized yet, but one option under consideration is joint use of the county park next to Cold Springs Middle School and some reconfiguration of the park itself to make it more accessible and useful to the community. The land for the high school at Wild Creek will be coming before the RSCVA, Washoe County, and the Board of Trustees of the school district in the coming months for hopefully final votes to transfer a portion of the course to the school district. The plans have been attempting to preserve the existing clubhouse and executive course, plus some additional space for holes on an expanded driving range, at least until the decision today, and I think that'll have to be revisited. The district plans to open this high school, as you heard from Mr. Eckert, in August of 2022, and it's a much-needed school in an area with Hug High School, which is, as many of you know, very in need of, the students there deserve a new facility, so we're working hard on that project. Following the opening of the new high school at Wild Creek, Hug itself will be completely overhauled to be a second career and technical academy, similar to AACT on Edison. There's a lot of demand for those programs. And so our goal is to refurbish Hug High School following the building of Wild Creek, or the high school, in 2023 to have a new technical high school. And at the same time, the district is continuing to spend about $20 million per year in critical repairs to existing schools. And in fact, we're moving forward on many plans for core school investments, which was part of our 2016 ballot question, WC1. We're under contract with architects who are looking now at possible expansions to Swope Middle School and McQueen High School. And McQueen is definitely in desperate need of expansion. There's it's been using modulars for several years, so we're very excited about moving forward on those. I want to say thank you publicly to our incredible capital projects team. It's a lot to manage. There's many moving parts and a lot of pieces, and none of it could happen without the support of the teams from your jurisdictions and all the permitting process and work that's required. So thank you on their behalf to all of your jurisdictions for your assistance with this process. So that's my report.
Thank you. Any other reports? All right, we will close that. Any requests for future agenda items?
Maybe. I guess if I may be
Yes,
recognized. I guess I'm wondering, there was a small comment made about, so the challenges we had today with the power line. There was a comment I thought I heard from our director, about a revision of rules, that I was unclear when that would be happening or what that would encompass, and if that needed to be agendized sooner rather than later. I thought you said, or someone said it would be addressed in an update at some point, like a certain process. And so my question is, no, I don't want to talk about it, I just want to know, is that a worthy topic of putting on the agenda, to better understand what kind of process you're looking at going forward and when that might take place?
It was on the, what happens if a regional plan amendment for a transmission line is moved, but the line is never put in there, what happens? I brought that up.
Right.
And we were saying that we probably would like to address it with the new regional plan.
Okay.
Right, but does it, I
That
guess.
was just maybe that was the item.
Right, so in what we've done at City of Reno Council, sometimes there's things that, for example, we're updating our Title 18 in response to changing the plan. But before we changed the plan, we changed a number of regulations, ordinances that seem to be needed sooner than waiting for the entire plan. You know, just they're really about process. So anyway, if it's possible, I would like to learn a little bit more about that and what that would entail and what a process is, what's being contemplated, an update on that, and potential action item, you know, in case we need to give some direction about that. So,
Thank you very much. Any other potential future agenda items? Seeing none, we will open final public comment. I see no one offering public comment, so we'll close public comment. Any written correspondence? There is none. All right, we are adjourned. Oh, wait a minute. I think with this group has to ask for a motion, the commission.
motion to adjourn.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
On the commission, we are adjourned.